The wind howled that afternoon like it had a grudge against the earth. Dust rolled down Main Street, slapping against the saloon windows, whispering rumors of trouble. Inside, the air was thick with cigar smoke and suspicion. Men sat in silence, glancing toward the door every time it creaked. That's when he walked in, the cowboy. Coat frayed, boots worn, hat pulled low to hide a story no one dared ask about. He didn't come for whiskey or women. He came for her. She was sitting by the piano, dressed in crimson that caught the lantern light like fire. Her eyes met his before the room could exhale. The tension hit faster than a Texas thunderclap. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, her voice low enough for only him to hear. He tilted his head, dust dripping from the brim of his hat. "You said that last spring," he replied, "and I came anyway." Someone coughed near the bar. The old piano man stopped playing. The silence turned sharp. "You'll regret loving me," she said, her tone more warning than confession. The cowboy didn't flinch. "Maybe, but I've been waiting for you." A glass shattered somewhere behind them. The sheriff had just walked in, his badge catching the light, and his eyes fixed right on the cowboy. The woman's fingers tightened around her glass. The cowboy didn't look away. Outside, thunder cracked. Inside, the storm was already here. If you're feeling that tension already, hit that like button, share this story with someone who loves a good mystery, and drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. The piano man began to play again, slower this time, like he knew a showdown was brewing. The sheriff took one step closer and said, "I thought I told you never to set foot in this town again." The saloon's walls seemed to close in, as the sheriff's boots echoed across the floorboards. Every man at the tables froze mid-drink, watching, waiting. The storm outside had nothing on the one brewing between those two men. The cowboy didn't reach for his holster, not yet. He just turned slightly, enough for the sheriff to see the faint smirk at the corner of his mouth. "Didn't think you'd remember me," the cowboy said, his tone quiet, like someone talking to a ghost. "Oh, I remember," the sheriff replied, his hand resting near his gun. "I remember the night the fire took half this town. You walked away when the rest of us stayed to fight it." The woman's gaze darted between them, her heartbeat loud in her ears. "Not here," she whispered, almost pleading. "Not again." The sheriff's eyes softened for a moment as they flicked toward her, then hardened again. "You're protecting him? After everything he's done?" The cowboy's voice cut in, steady as a church bell. "I didn't start that fire, Sheriff. You know who did." A gust of wind burst through the door, rattling every window pane in the room. Lightning flashed, casting the three of them in silver light. The lawman, the outlaw, and the woman caught between their pasts. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the sheriff stepped closer. "Leave town before sundown," he said, "or I'll bury what's left of your pride right here on Main Street." The cowboy didn't answer. He just tipped his hat, turned, and walked out into the rain. The door swung shut behind him, leaving the room buzzing with whispers. The woman rose slowly, following him with her eyes. Her reflection flickered in the bar mirror, the look of someone torn between love and ruin. Outside, thunder rolled again, and the cowboy disappeared into the storm. As the piano faded into silence, the sheriff turned to her and said, "You never told him the truth, did you?" The rain hit the roof of her small room like 1,000 restless drums. She stood by the window, staring out into the dark, where the cowboy's shadow had vanished beyond the stables. The storm made the world feel smaller, tighter, like every secret was closing in at once. The sheriff's words wouldn't leave her mind. "You never told him the truth, did you?" She pressed her hands against the glass and whispered to herself, "No, I didn't." Outside, lightning flashed, revealing a figure moving near the corral. The cowboy. He was tying his horse, his hat drenched, his coat heavy with rain. Even through the blur of the storm, she could see the weight he carried, something deeper than guilt, older than sorrow. Her memory pulled her backward. The night of the fire, the screams, the smoke. The moment she saw the sheriff run into the blaze, and the cowboy walking away, his face set like stone. But what no one else saw was who really lit that match. It wasn't the cowboy. It wasn't the sheriff. It was her. She closed her eyes, the guilt striking harder than thunder. She had tried to protect the sheriff's reputation, the town's peace. But in doing so, she'd turned the only man who'd ever loved her into an outcast. Down below, the cowboy looked up toward her window, as if he could sense her thoughts. For a moment, their eyes met. A silent confession carried through rain and regret. He turned and walked toward the edge of town. The storm began to ease, leaving only the sound of his footsteps fading into the mud. Her hand trembled on the windowsill. She whispered into the dark, "You were right. I'll regret this." As dawn began to break, a single knock came at her door. Slow, heavy, and deliberate, the sound came again. A slow, measured knock that echoed through her small room. The fire in the hearth had burned low, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. She hesitated, her breath shallow. At that hour, no one came knocking unless it was trouble or truth. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and opened the door. The sheriff stood there, hat dripping, a weary look in his eyes. His badge caught the dim light like a scar. "You're up early," she said, her voice careful. "I didn't sleep," he answered. "Couldn't." He stepped inside, boots leaving wet prints on the floorboards. "We need to talk about him." Her chest tightened. "He's gone." "Not far enough," the sheriff replied. "You know he won't leave without answers. He came back for something." She turned toward the window, watching the morning light creep across the horizon. "He came back for the truth," she whispered. The sheriff sighed, removing his hat. "You think telling him changes anything? That man carries a storm wherever he rides." She looked at him then, eyes glassy with the kind of sorrow words can't carry. "He carries the storm I started." The sheriff froze. His gaze searched hers. "What are you saying?" Her lips trembled, but the truth broke free. "That fire, it wasn't him." The silence that followed was colder than the rain outside. The sheriff's hand dropped to his side, his voice a low growl. "You're telling me you've let this whole town hate him for something you did?" Tears welled, but she didn't look away. "I thought I was protecting you, protecting us." The sheriff stepped closer, his tone sharp. "You've just signed both our fates." Outside a horse neighed, distant but familiar. The cowboy was back. The sheriff reached for his gun and whispered, "If he finds out before I do, none of us are walking away from this." By mid-morning, the storm had passed, leaving the sky washed clean and soft. The air smelled of wet cedar and dust. The cowboy rode slow along the ridge, the town shrinking behind him like a bad memory that refused to fade. He stopped beneath a lone mesquite tree and dismounted. His horse huffed, steam rising from its coat. The cowboy reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a folded letter, edges worn, the ink smudged by rain and time. He'd read it 100 times, a note written by her hand years ago. "Don't come looking for me. You'll only find trouble. But he had come anyway, because some things a man can't unlove, no matter the danger. He unfolded the letter again, and for the first time he noticed something strange. A faint mark near the bottom, a half-burned emblem. The same mark he'd seen carved into the doorframe of the old barn that burned down the night the town turned against him. He clenched his jaw. So it was never me, he muttered. It was her secret all along. The sound of hooves broke his thoughts. A young ranch hand from town approached, waving a telegram. "Sheriff's looking for you," the boy said, nervous. "Says he wants a word. Private." The cowboy took the message without replying. The sheriff never asked to talk unless there was more than talk coming. He tucked the letter into his coat and looked back toward the town. "All right," he said softly. "One last conversation." He mounted up, his eyes narrowing as the wind shifted. Somewhere behind him, thunder rumbled again, distant, like a promise waiting to be kept. If you're feeling the tension rise, make sure to hit that like button, share this story with a friend who loves the Wild West, and tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. I want to know how far this story's traveled. As he rode back toward town, a rifle barrel glinted from a rooftop, aimed straight at him. The sun had climbed high, baking the wet earth into steam as the cowboy rode back into town. The air carried a strange stillness, the kind that comes right before something breaks. Main Street was quiet, too quiet. Even the wind held its breath. He dismounted near the blacksmith shop, scanning the rooftops. That's when he saw it, a quick glint, metal catching light. He didn't think, just dropped low. The shot rang out, slicing through the silence like a scream. The bullet hit the post behind him, splintering wood inches from his head. Dust exploded around him as he rolled to cover. Somewhere above, boots scuffed against the shingles. The shooter was moving. He drew his revolver, eyes narrowing. "You picked the wrong man to surprise," he muttered. But before he could fire, another shot cracked through the air. Not from the rooftop this time, but from the edge of the alley. The gunman above tumbled off the roof, hitting the ground hard. The cowboy turned, gun still raised, and saw her standing there, dress torn, eyes fierce, smoke curling from the barrel of the pistol in her hand. "You shouldn't have come back," she said, voice shaking with a mix of fear and something else, something that sounded a lot like relief. He looked at her, chest rising and falling. "I didn't come for forgiveness," he said. "I came for the truth." The townsfolk began to gather, whispering. The sheriff's office door swung open, and out stepped the lawman himself. He saw the body, saw the two of them standing together, and his face turned to stone. "Well," he said slowly, hand resting on his holster, "looks like the past finally caught up to us." The cowboy didn't lower his gun. Neither did the sheriff. The woman stood between them, heart pounding, knowing only one of them might walk away. Before anyone could move, a second rifle shot echoed from somewhere unseen, and this time someone fell. The echo of that gunshot rolled across Main Street, like thunder refusing to die. When the dust settled, the crowd gasped. The sheriff was down. His badge lay in the dirt, gleaming against the blood-dark mud. The cowboy stood frozen, revolver still raised, eyes wide. But he hadn't pulled the trigger. His gun was still fully loaded. The woman rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside the sheriff. "Stay with me," she cried, pressing her hands against the wound. He groaned, voice breaking. "Wasn't you?" the sheriff rasped. "Roof, behind the saloon." His eyes shifted toward the rooftops, searching for the shadow that fired the fatal shot. The cowboy followed his gaze and saw movement, a silhouette darting across the roofline before vanishing into the alley. Without a word, he ran. Boots hit mud, coat flaring behind him like smoke. The woman yelled after him, "Don't! You'll get yourself killed!" But he didn't stop. He turned into the narrow alley, breath sharp in his lungs, revolver drawn. The smell of gunpowder hung heavy. At the far end, a figure climbed onto a wagon, rifle slung across their back. "Why?" the cowboy shouted. The figure paused, then turned, revealing a face he hadn't seen since before the fire. A ranch foreman, long thought dead in that blaze. "You should have stayed gone," the foreman growled. "Some ghosts don't like being remembered." He fired once more. The bullet grazed the cowboy's arm, spinning him back against the wall. Pain flared white-hot, but he steadied himself, returning fire. The foreman's rifle clattered to the ground as the wagon bolted into the open desert, leaving only dust and echoes. The cowboy clutched his arm, staggering toward the saloon. The truth was chasing him faster than any bullet. And he reached the doorway. The woman stood waiting, holding something in her hand. The burned emblem from the old fire. She stood in the doorway, her eyes shadowed but steady. In her hand, the small metal emblem glowed faintly in the lamplight, half melted, its edges warped by heat. The same mark that had haunted the cowboy for years. He stopped short, chest heaving, blood seeping from his sleeve. "You kept it," he said quietly. "I couldn't throw it away," she whispered. "It's what's left of that night, and of what I did." Her voice trembled, the confession spilling out like floodwater breaking through a dam. "I lit that fire, not meaning to destroy, just to scare the men who came for you. But it spread faster than I could stop it. The barn, the house, everything." The cowboy stared, jaw tight. "And you let the town think it was me." Tears welled, but she didn't look away. "The sheriff begged me to stay quiet. He said the truth would ruin us both. I thought if you left, maybe things would settle." He stepped closer, his boots echoing against the saloon floorboards. "And did they?" "No," she said, her voice cracking. "Nothing's been right since you rode away." For a long moment, the two just stood there, two souls bound by the same ruin. The cowboy reached out, taking the emblem from her trembling hand. He turned it over, recognizing the shape at last. A cattle brand from the ranch once owned by the foreman who'd just tried to kill him. "So that's it," he murmured. "The fire wasn't meant for me. It was meant for him." Her eyes widened. "He's alive?" "Alive," he said grimly. "And armed." Outside, thunder began again in the distance, low and steady, like the sound of boots approaching. He glanced toward the window. "It's not over yet." She looked up at him, fear creeping into her voice. "Then what happens now?" The cowboy holstered his revolver and said, "Now, we finish what the fire started." By the time the sun began to set, the town was wrapped in that strange golden stillness that always comes before a storm, when even the wind holds its breath. The cowboy stood at the edge of Main Street, hat low, coat torn, his shadow stretching long across the dirt. He knew the foreman would come. Men like that always did. When the past starts burning again, it doesn't stop until it consumes everything. The woman watched from the saloon balcony, her heart pounding against the wood rail. The sheriff's body had been carried to the chapel, his badge placed beside him, a symbol of what pride can cost. She whispered a prayer, not sure who it was for anymore. Then, from the far end of the street, A horse appeared. The foreman rode slow, rifle across his lap, a cruel grin twisting his face. The setting sun painted them both in blood-red light. "So," the foreman called out, "you finally figured it out." The cowboy's voice was calm, low. "You burned that barn to cover your theft, didn't you? The cattle, the gold, all of it." The foreman laughed. "I did what I had to do to survive. You? You just walked away." "I walked away because I had nothing left," the cowboy said, hand resting near his gun. The two men stared across the street. Time seemed to stop. A tumbleweed drifted between them, rolling like fate itself. Then came the draw. 2 flashes of light split the twilight. The crowd ducked. When the echo faded, the foreman's horse bolted riderless into the horizon. The cowboy stood still, revolver smoking, eyes hard with the weight of justice long overdue. The woman ran down the stairs, tears and relief tangled in her breath. "It's over," she said. He shook his head slowly. "No, not until I make peace with the ghosts." He looked toward the chapel, where the sheriff lay in silence. The cowboy whispered, "There's one truth left to tell, and it ain't mine." Night had settled over the town, soft and somber. The chapel's windows glowed with candlelight, flickering like small, stubborn stars against the dark. The cowboy walked through the doors, hat in hand, boots echoing on the wooden floor. The scent of smoke from the earlier gunfight still lingered, mingling with the faint perfume of lilac from the pews. He stopped beside the sheriff's casket. The badge lay on the man's chest, polished bright, the same badge that had once shone with pride and ended in guilt. The woman entered quietly behind him. Her steps faltered as she reached the front, eyes brimming. "He was a good man once," she said softly. "He still was," the cowboy replied. "Just caught between loyalty and love, same as us." She looked at him then, the candlelight catching the tears on her face. "You could leave now. The foreman's gone. No one's after you anymore." He nodded, but there was something in his eyes, a weight that didn't lift so easy. "You said I'd regret loving you." She swallowed hard. "And do you?" The cowboy looked down at the sheriff, then back at her. "No. Regrets for things that end. What I feel, it's something that never will." Outside, the wind stirred the chimes hanging from the chapel porch, each note like a memory whispering goodbye. He turned toward the door, pausing one last time. "You've got a life to rebuild," he said, "and I've got one to make right." She stepped closer, her hand brushing his. "If you ride off tonight, will I ever see you again?" The cowboy smiled, a small, tired smile that carried both sorrow and peace. "If the wind's kind, maybe." He walked out into the moonlight, his silhouette fading into silver mist. The night swallowed him whole, leaving only the echo of spurs and a promise unspoken. If you followed this journey all the way to the end, partner, hit that like button, share this story with someone who loves a tale of redemption, and tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. I'd sure love to know. As the woman turned back to the altar, a folded letter lay beside the badge, written in the cowboy's hand. It read, "I've been waiting for you, but not in this life."